on change management. I got started, I sometimes feel really old when my introduction comes up. I've been a member of ASQ for more than 20 years, and I'm not sure how that's possible since I'm only like 25 years old, right? But I started in quality in the software world. So I came from the software quality side of things, and I started as a software quality analyst. And what would happen is typically people, we would throw the software over the wall to the end users, and then there would be all this drama around, why is this changing? What are you changing? Why didn't you tell us? And that's kind of how I got started in change management, was through that process. And so I started doing training because as the testers, as the analysts, we were the last ones to touch it, and we were probably the most familiar with it. And so we would do the training. And I started thinking back then, there has to be a better way. And so that's kind of how I started getting into change management. A few years ago, actually it was 2011 study on the future of quality came out talking about the increasing rate of change. And I decided then I was going to step full-time into change management. And so since then, 2012, I got certified by ProSci with the ADKAR methodology, and I've been doing change management full-time ever since, mostly in technology-related. I don't get too far from technology, but I don't think most of us don't get too far from technology, which is what is speeding up that rapid rate of change. So that's kind of how I came to change management, and don't get too far from quality. So today we're going to talk about what specifically change management is, so that we're all on the same page and we're all talking about change management, and then really why change management is so important. And probably a lot of you intuitively know this, since we have so many people on the line. This is obviously a hot topic, because with quality, things are always changing, right? We're improving things, they're always changing. So how do we accelerate the adoption of those changes and make sure that they stick, especially when everything is speeding up around us? We're going to talk today about a 5-step approach to change, and then success factors. I'm a big fan of the 80-20 rule, Pareto, right? As most of you probably are. And so I focus on those things that are going to get the biggest bang for your buck. And then we'll talk a little bit about results. So when you leave here today from this webinar, you should be able to take this back and implement things right away, and also build a case for change with the people around you, with your colleagues, with your managers, and drive a structured approach to change management within your organization to accelerate your project objectives. So what is change management? This is one of those things when you ask a lot of people, ask 10 people what is change management, you're going to get 12 different answers. So today what we're talking about, change management is the application of a structured process and a set of tools for leading the people side of change to achieve a desired outcome. What's important when you think about change management, and I run into this myself, is that typically sometimes people want to do change management when it's unclear what the change objective is. And that's not change management. That may be leading change or driving change. It may be a catalyst for change. But managing change means that you have a desired outcome. You have something you want, you have a change that you want somebody to do. You want them to change their behavior. You want them to change their activities. You want them to change their process. You have to have a desired outcome. You can't do change management until then. And then really it's a structured process and a set of tools for the people side of change. So change management targets leadership within all levels of the organization. Everybody needs to be working together, executives, senior leaders, managers, supervisors, because at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is get people to feel engaged in the change process. When people are engaged in the process, when they feel that they are a part of the change, they're more likely to work and harness that energy, work collectively toward that objective so that we can realize the benefits and deliver the results. There's a saying that people resist change. People in general resist change. And the reality is people don't resist change, they resist being changed. So the key point of change management is to take those outsiders, those people that are being changed, and to move them into the process so that they become part of the change, so that they're engaged in the process. And that's what change management helps us do, the structured process. So why change management? Again, this is the 2011 Future of Quality study, which is the key forces influencing the future of quality. And number 4, and this was, what, 6 years ago, the increasing rate of change. And I think it probably has moved up there. But even if you look at some of these other influencers, change is a part of that. So you have the workforce of the future. You have new people coming into the workforce. You have the aging population, so that brain trust that's leaving the workforce. You've got innovation, which foundation of change, right? You're changing things. So even within this, there's a lot of change. And change management, we can't take quality for granted because it is a competitive advantage. And so you see here, when you look over time, what the focus of quality has been over like the last 50 years. We started with prevention, and we had a focus on product, and then eventually we moved to process, and then moved to service, and now we're moving into change and transformation. It's about the experience, the total customer experience. And there are so many moving parts, people become change weary. And that's another reason that you need a change management, is you need that structured process and the tools to be able to not control the change, but to manage the chaos so it doesn't, so that the changes stick. So change and transformation are the new tools of quality. When the 2015 Future of Quality report came out, they looked at the key factors, and they said, you know what, these haven't changed. They may have reordered a little bit, but the key factors are still the key factors. So they took a deep dive into each of those elements, and they got some perspectives on that. If you haven't read these future studies, they're really very interesting, and they offer a lot of insight into where our profession is going. And so from within the report, there's an endless but essential requirement to knock down silos of information. So we have a need for high quality information to be broadly shared to allow for timely decisions. And so there's a lot of data out there, and we need to transform that data into information so we can make good decisions. And it's coming at us fast. And keeping pace with all of the changes from the customer demand, with what they're wanting, because they're becoming more sophisticated, and that bar is getting higher. And it's just, there's so much. There's the technology that's changing, the processes are changing, the customer experience needs to be changing, and we have all of these moving parts, and you need to bring that together into change management, because everything affects everything else, for better and for worse. So if you think system thinking, if you make a change in one area, it's necessarily going to impact other things, and you have to be thinking about it that way and managing all of that change together. So that is why change management, why it's so important, and why we as quality professionals need to have this tool in our toolkit to understand when and where and how we can apply change management so that we can accelerate our project and our results. Because it connects to the business results, and it increases the probability of project success, and it translates to financial performance. So why change management? It's because it's so important. It also mitigates negative consequences, and it manages the employee resistance to change. And then what I like about it a lot is the change competency. By using a structured process within your organization, people get comfortable with those waves of change that are coming, because they know what to expect. They know you're going to communicate the change. They know they're going to get the training. They know that they're going to that everything is going to come together, and then they have the trust that they can just sit back and not necessarily be afraid of all of the change that's coming. Because when you have the chaos, it's like you don't know, and we're meaning machines. As human beings, we're meaning machines, and we're always applying meaning to things. And so the first thing that people do is they start talking, right? They'll go and say, oh, did you hear this was happening? And I heard this. What did you hear? Did you hear that? I heard this. And then they go to each of these people. And what are they doing when they're doing that? They're not being productive, right? They're not working because they're talking and they're trying to figure out what the change is and how it's going to impact them. Should they be afraid? Should they not be afraid? Sometimes they're picking up the phone, calling a recruiter saying, hey, find me another job because this is freaking me out over here. Maybe not in that language, but that's exactly what's happening. So as we deal with the increasing rate of change, that change competency within our organizations is becoming more and more important. So this is the flight risk model. What I was talking about is when people first hear the change, they all automatically, because we're meaning machines and we're humans, is they start figuring out what's going on. Is it impacting me? If they're not clear, if there's no good communication about what the change is, then what they're doing is they're going to talk to people about it, and then that's loss of productivity. And in some cases, if they think it's going to impact them badly, or if they think it's going to impact them in a bad way, what they're going to do is they're going to check out. So maybe they're not working at all. They're talking to their recruiter. And so you see that there's a lot of productivity. And if you have effective change management, thinking about the impact on the people and managing that communication so that everybody knows what's going on, then you have a lot, you reduce and mitigate that the flight risk there. So these are some studies that ProSci put together. ProSci is an organization, and really all they do is study change management. And so they do benchmarking studies on a regular basis, and then they look at what are the top organizations doing and how are they doing it. So it's continuously refining what we know about change management and what's working, because that's a landscape that's always changing too. So it's changing change management, as it were. And if you look at the correlation of change management effectiveness to meeting the project objectives, that's huge, 17% versus 95%. Nope. Okay. So then the same thing of staying on schedule, an excellent change management practice will put you at 75% correlation versus 16% with poor change management. So change management helps the project manager stay on track because of productivity, because people are working in alignment together, because you have the energy of the employees participating in the change. You're not forcing them, they're engaged in the process, so they're helping with the change. And then the same thing with the budget. Because you have you need less people, you have more productivity, you need less people, and you keep everybody on track. And it's the results are clear here. Why change management? I would say, why not change management? So you look at the results. I mean, even if you have just an adequate, a fair change management practice, not even excellent, you're still significantly impacting your schedule, your budget, and the likelihood of you meeting your project objectives. So one of the things that's important to understand, what is change management? It's a structured process to impact the people side of change. What I find a lot is that, particularly with executives, they think of change as an event, not a process. We implemented it. It's done. Sitting, process, technology. But what they fail to realize is that they went through a process. And change is a process. And they want to get the employees to come to where they are already in a faster way. But everybody has to go through the same process. And that's where you have a current state, then you do transition, and there's a future state. And people move along that rate of change at different paces. But it is a process. The 5 tenets of change management, we change for a reason, right? We're meaning machines. If I ask you to do something different, if I say, John, would you get up and go over and sit in this other seat over here? What's the first question you're going to ask? Why? Why do you want me to do that? We change for a reason. Is like, why am I doing this? And it doesn't matter if it's something simple or if it's something significant, total transformation in the organization. Back when I was 18, I was in the Army, and I had my executive officer said, Private Maskell, report to the bivouac tent and to the command tent, and I said, why? Meaning machines. Because I said so was his answer. That doesn't work in corporate America. It doesn't work in the environment that we're in today. It might work in the military when you're in basic training. Doesn't work otherwise, because I said so. Works if you're maybe 6 or 7 and your parents said, because I said so. After that, we need a reason. And then organizational change requires individuals to change. So when you're looking at change management, you don't need to worry about the corporate processes until you figure out what the individual process is. Because essentially what we're doing, the organizational outcomes are the collective result of individual change. So if you have 10,000 people in your organization or 10 people in your organization, each one of those people are going through the same change process. And then change management is an enabling framework for managing the people side of change. It's a structured process with a set of tools to help you get people to go through that process in an easier way, easier for the organization and easier for them. Less drama, less loss of productivity. And then the application of change management helps to realize the benefits and desired outcomes of change. So ProSci, again, they did the benchmarking study and they asked people that had gone through a change initiative, when should you start, or when are you going to change, what are you going to do change management next time? And overwhelmingly, you see they're going to do project management at change management at project initiation. So we looked at even the people that did it at project initiation, or the people that did it at project planning last time, which is pretty early for a lot of change management initiatives. They said, no, we're doing it at project initiation. You got to have that up front, because it's that first rumor, that first communication of the change where you start to lose the productivity, and that's a drag on your project schedule, your project objectives, your budget, all of that. So you have to be thinking, putting change management out front with your project, right up there in the initiation phase. So the 5 building blocks of successful change. Say that 3 times fast, right? You cannot manage change at an organizational level until you know how to manage change with a single individual. And that's what ADKAR helps you understand, is how does an individual go through the change process. Then you can start segmenting your change group of the people that are changing, and figuring out, are there commonalities and similarities that you can bundle them together and go through this process. So ADKAR is the shorthand for that, and it's awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. We'll go through each one of these. So awareness is change begins with understanding why. So we said we're meaning machines, right? We change for a reason. So what this does is it puts it out front. We let people know why they're changing, why we want them to change. What's the nature of the change? Why is the change needed? Why now? Why are we asking them to change now? And what's the risk of not changing? And even sharing different alternatives with them. We checked this, we looked at that, this is why we picked this particular solution. And involving them in that and sharing that with them. The thing that's important here is to understand resistance is normal. This is who we are. This is just people. And 90% of resistance evaporates by answering why. So you can get rid of all of this abstract and the drama and all this noise. 90% of it goes away. Then what you have is the opportunity to really understand, the real resistance. Where's the real resistance, and why is that there? And then you can come up with resistance management plans. Maybe there's more training that's needed, or there's a different process that needs to change. There's some real obstacle to the change that you're asking of people. But until you get rid of that noise, that 90% that's going to evaporate with understanding why, it's going to be hard for you to hear that. So that's starting with why. People resist the pain of change and the fear of the unknown. And that's another reason we have to communicate early and create that awareness of why we're asking them to change. And then desire, this is often the hardest step because it is a very personal choice. And it involves making a personal decision. Each person needs to decide for themselves and commit to the change. And that's why the awareness, the why, is so important. Because if you don't know why you need to change and you don't understand the change, how can you make a personal decision? And that's where all of that lost productivity is. People are just trying to understand, what is the change? What's happening? How does it impact me? And what's in it for me is really how people come to that decision to participate. What's in it for me? And they make that decision to engage and to participate. Knowledge is one of the steps that we do typically best because it's training. Well, we know they need training. They need training on this new software. They need training on the new process. So we're going to do training. In some cases, maybe there's foundational training. I've worked on an ERP project, and we had a contingent of people in the organization that were not technology. They had never been on a computer before, and now we were asking them to do HR self-service and we had to train them how to use a computer. They had computer 101 classes that we had to put them through. So the training, the knowledge of requiring how to change, we need to tell them, this is how you need to change. This is the specific of how we want you to change. Then what happens is ability. So typically with training, you're going to go to a class, and they're going to send you a manual. Here's what we want you to do. Then you have to take that back and put that into implementation, right? You have to go back to your office and use this new software, execute this process. That's really where the questions come up. Ability, the ability to change. And a lot of times there's other things that stand in the way, other obstacles, another process that's conflicting with the one that you're implementing that you may not have considered, or a lack of understanding of the software. And if you focus on ability, and which is the rubber meets road, then what happens is you have a broader perspective of the change, and then you can make sure that they have the ability to put the change into practice. The thing about ability, this is where change happens, right? You can do all the awareness in the world. You can do the training, and you get that, yep, people say, yep, I want to participate in this change. But if they go back to their desk and they can't put it into practice, they can't change, which is why you have to look at all those obstacles. What's standing in the way of actually implementing this? And perhaps providing some type of support, coaches, subject matter experts, a helpline. So if you have questions, call us so you can figure out what's standing in the way. Maybe they need more training. Maybe they need job aids. Maybe they just need somebody to walk them through how to log on to the software, because you train them on how to do the software, but you didn't train them on how to log in. Something as simple as that. So when you look at all the policies, processes, procedures that support or interfere, then people can actually put the change into practice. This is where they change, is in ability. The change actually happens. And then you have reinforcement. Change must be reinforced to be sustained. Human beings are creatures of habit. This is normal. And we have to take that into consideration. And again, change is a process, not an event. So they have to be comfortable with it. They have to understand it. They have to use it. And eventually they become habit. And that's what the reinforcement is looking at the actions that increase the likelihood that change will be continued. That might be auditing or monitoring or looking at reports and making sure that it's actually staying implemented. Maybe it's communicating, or doing communication after the implementation and celebrating the successes, the recognition and the rewards for people that successfully put the change into place. And then, you have to look at the plans for reinforcement. Perhaps somebody needs to go back through corrective actions and training to get them more up to speed. Or maybe there's processes that are standing in the way of them actually continuing with the change. So that's ADKAR: awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. And that is a process that every individual goes through when they're asked to change. And sometimes quickly, and sometimes it takes longer. And there are things that we can do to impact the acceleration of that process. So, look forward here. The success factors, sponsorship is 4 times more important than any other factor in change management. And we'll talk about each one of these. Well, not all of them, I guess. Sorry. We'll talk about these in more detail. But sponsorship is the #1 thing, and it's active, visible, engaged sponsorship, because employees particularly take their cues from the management, from the executive team. If it's not important to the executive team, why is it going to be important to the frontline people? And so if you're asking somebody to change, you got to have your sponsors walking the talk, and they got to be out there championing it. Sponsorship is active, visible, and engaged. And that's why sponsorship is so important. And because even when we talk about communications, so doing communications is great, but it's not a substitute for sponsorship. The communications need to come from the sponsor, but the sponsor also needs to have informal communications. There's a lot that goes into that. And it doesn't actually take a lot of energy to do those things, but more often than not, if I'm asked to take a look at a change management activity that's not a project that's not going very well, it's probably lack of sponsorship. And so the sponsor needs to be active, visible, engaged, as I said, talk about it formally and informally. So communicating, if he's on the elevator, walking down the hallway, talking about it with his colleagues, with his subordinates, and just anybody he comes into contact with. And then also looking at creating a coalition, an alliance, so that there's a team of sponsors, so that perhaps there's one sponsor, but he needs to create a coalition and get other people involved so that they are out there talking about it, championing it, and moving this change initiative forward. Because that demonstrates commitment, both in words and actions. And thinking about it, sponsor is a verb and not a title. So who's sponsoring this project? Who's sponsoring this change initiative? That's the person whose energy is going into the project, and 4 times more important than any other factor. So as quality professionals, one of the things that we have to do is assess our sponsor's competencies. Is it the right level of sponsor? Based on the project, the sponsor might be a manager. It might need to be in the C-suite. And too high or too low is going to create a problem in mind of the employee that's asking to change. Oh, you've got this major transformational change that you want me to go through, and it's going to be really painful. But you put a manager on as the sponsor. Yeah, that's not a lot of commitment from the organization. So I'm going to be, as an employee, I'm going to be as committed as the organization is. There's a saying that I like, is I can't care more than you do. And that's why you have to be looking at your sponsorship and make sure that you have the right sponsor. Sometimes what you have is an introverted sponsor when you really need is an extroverted sponsor. So somebody that's not comfortable going out and talking about the project is going to have a more difficult time getting other people to be engaged. That person in particular needs to have an alliance and create a coalition so that there are other people out there talking it up. The people that are really good at that they can be out there and maybe this person's in the back doing more of the project management or the more strategic types of things. But that's an important thing to think about in your sponsorship. And then as a team member, you want to make sure that your sponsor is prepared. So if you're the project manager or the change manager or somebody that just has a vested interest, you need to take a look at helping your sponsor so that they know that this is what's expected of them. So you train them, you coach them, provide them with the information that they need to effectively sponsor your project. Communication is the next one in terms of success factors. And I like to say, if you think you've communicated too much, you're wrong. Under communicating is probably one of the biggest things that people do, and probably one of the easiest things to correct. You have to make sure that the message is coming from the right person, because employees do not, they hear the messages differently coming from their manager. They want to hear messages from their manager that are directly impact them. How is this change going to impact me? They want to hear from their manager because that's a personal relationship, but they want that executive to talk about the vision, the broader aspect of what the change is, what the change means to the organization. So we want to be sure that in communication, we send the right message to the right audience at the right time, from the right sender, through the right channel. More communication was the #1 do differently next time suggestion on the studies, the benchmarking studies. So again, if you think you have communicated enough, you're wrong. Double it at least. Typically, individuals, people, they hear kind of in bits and bytes, and there's a lot of noise, especially more noise today than, again, that accelerating rate of change. There's so many messages coming in that we need to hear a message 5 to 7 times before we really get it, before we understand it. And you can't just say the same thing over and over again, because that is painful. But you have to find new and creative ways, and that's where the right channel. You can't do always email, right? You have to, and you can't rely on only face-to-face communications, because that's not very effective. So you need to have video and conference calls and team meetings and newsletters and flyers and posters and all of these things. You have to think about, what is it you're trying to communicate, who's your audience, and how do they need to hear this? And more communication. You also need to think about what you're communicating. I like this framework, ethos, logos, and pathos, because typically what happens is we wind up communicating on 2 of these fronts, and we really need all 3 to be effective in our communication. We need to be sure that we've established trust and credibility, that we use logic and reason in our communications, but also the passion, the emotion. And that's often the one that in corporate communications is that it's missed. And this goes to that why piece, as making sure that you really tease that out. We influence via inspiration. You can get people to do things based on fear, but that's not really sustainable. You need to have that passion, the influence via inspiration. Even if you're talking about a negative, something that has negative connotation, you're shutting down the facility or you're doing layoffs, you need to focus on the inspiration. The why are you doing the layoffs? Not because we're lousy at what we do, but it's a fallback position so we can grow again. And you have to focus on the future there, not fears and regrets. More on the communication front is understanding what followers want from leaders. Gallup put this book out. It's called Strengths-Based Leadership. And what they did is they studied 10,000 followers, and they found that what people want from their leaders are 4 things: trust, compassion, stability, and hope. And when I read these, I thought, where this applies more in change management than I think any other place. In change, in times of change, you need to have trust. The people that are communicating, the employees need to trust what they're saying. And if your sponsor's doing the communication and you don't have trust, employees don't trust the sponsor, that's going to be a big problem. And that needs to be corrected. There needs to be compassion, particularly in change. Understand, yes, I know that this change is impacting you, or maybe it's a negative impact, and I'm sorry about that. I have compassion for what you might be going through, the angst, the anxiety. And then the stability, the constancy and signs of change is like, we're going to get through this together. We're going to have, it's turmoil right now, but on the other side of the change, there's a brighter tomorrow. And that's part of that hope as well. So if you're putting the communications together, making sure that you have the ethos, logos, and pathos, and then the trust, compassion, stability, and hope really goes a long way to making sure that your communications are truly effective. You can't just put out, this is what the change is, or the logistics of a change. That doesn't inspire people. Like, so what? Why? Why am I doing this? The success factors, going beyond communication to engagement, to truly understanding what the employees' needs are. And this Gallup's Q12 survey can help with that too, is trying to get what your people understanding what their true needs are, and that they want to be cared about and valued and known, and they want growth. And then this can help you dial in your communications based on what your changes are as well. Okay, I'm just checking my time. We're doing pretty good. Closing in on the end. So the communication engagement increases the odds of success. So you can see here, you can kind of choose where you want to be and what level of engagement you want, and how much more success that you're going to have if you move beyond communication into engagement. So this is the approach. Well, we have the structured approach, right? Change management is a structured approach and a set of tools. And what you see here is if you have 1,000 people or 10,000 people, everybody's going through that ADKAR process. They all go through it, but they may stay longer in desire or longer in ability. Maybe reinforcement is longer, but everybody's going through that process. And that's what change management does, is putting a plan together to help everybody get through that process eventually, and make sure that you've got everybody going, getting through it so that they accept and implement that change, and that the change sticks. ProSize ROI change management model. If you look at this, this is just the results of change management. You can see that poorly managed change takes a lot longer to get any type of ROI on it. And with exceptionally managed change management, you start beating your projections very early on. So that is the end of our presentation, moving into the Q&A phase. I don't see a lot of questions in the chat, but Norval, maybe you can see if people have hands raised.
Okay, thanks, Karen. Let's see if anybody does have any questions. We can certainly give people a chance to submit a question. It looks like we have about 12 minutes or so left before the top of the hour, so there's still plenty of time if anyone would like to ask Karen a question. While we're waiting, I noticed in the attendees section that there's a few folks when they input their information into GoToMeeting, they put abbreviations into it. If you need a cert for RU purposes, it's going to be a little hard to send you a cert because we don't know what the abbreviations mean. So anyway, if you could let us know who you are, if you do have an abbreviation, that'd be very helpful. Karen, looks like you do have a question.
Okay.
From Edward Schnell. Oh, looks like it maybe just came to me. Which CM certification would be good for DoD personnel?
DoD personnel?
Yeah, Department of Defense is
Oh,
I mean,
okay.
that's what that means.
One of the things that I like about the ProSci ADCAR certification, which is what I talked about here today, is that it makes room for, first of all, it's based on data. It's based on studies of large organizations, small organizations, and what really works. And it's a model that has a lot of flexibility for different tools. The ADCAR process doesn't change individual to individual. We still go through the awareness. We need the awareness. We make a personal decision. We need training. We need to put it into implementation, and it needs to be reinforced. What's nice about the ADCAR model and ProSci is that you can use a lot of different tools. You have to prepare your change, manage your change, reinforce your change. And I think that you can't go wrong with this. And then supplement it with, there's tons of tools in the back end, resistance management plan, training plan, communication plan. All of those things are in there, and there's just a lot of flexibility for adding tools for whatever particular need that you have. So I'm biased because I'm ProSci certified, but I chose it for a reason, and it works and it holds up. It's not a one and done type of thing. They continue to do research. Recently, they released one of the success factors is integrating with project management. That's key. And there's a lot of things that you can do. If you start with your strategy and understanding this process and the success factors, again, it's the 80-20 rule. If I come in and I'm the only person doing change management, first thing I'm going to focus on is sponsorship. I'm going to focus on getting my sponsor up to speed. I'm going to get my sponsor to start developing an alliance. And then I'm going to start getting communication from the sponsor and general communication about what's going on. But between those two things, to me, you're accomplishing quite a bit.
Okay, it looks like
Emily,
yeah.
Do you have suggestions on addressing changes mandated from the top when you are responsible to manage implementation at a lower level of the organization? I find that, again, sometimes I feel like a broken record. Sponsorship, making sure that your sponsors are prepared and that they understand what's expected of them, and coaching them. And I find that most sponsors are very receptive to that conversation, that they don't realize taking this data, sharing it with them, and saying, here's what I need you to do, or this is what I would like you to do, and having somewhat of a negotiation with them and saying, this is how I need you to be the voice, because then I can implement it easier. It's going to be easier for me. I need you to tell me what the why, so that I can go to the people in my command and share with them what you're saying so they can hear it from you. And then I can get the feedback from them and get them to participate. And I always like to, I like the why because it takes away the noise. You get rid of 90% of the resistance, then you can focus on the 10%. And then what I like to do is focus on what I call covert resistance and making it overt resistance. So you take the people that are underground and in the background, sabotaging you, being very quiet about it, get them to speak up, come to the table to share their concerns, so that now you have covert resistance and you can deal with it. When it's covert resistance you can't deal with, you want it to be overt. The other thing that you want to do is look for key influencers in your organization. Who are the people in non-managerial executive roles that are influencers, and get them involved, because then get them engaged. Then that's an 80-20 thing too, right? You get these key influencers, then get them to go forth and deal with the covert resistors. I hope that helps.
Okay, does anyone else have? Yep, does anybody else have?
Emily says absolutely. Okay.
Oh, there you go, from Alfonso.
What can you do to convince yourself convince yourself when it's mandated from the top. Yeah, it's hard to implement a change if you don't completely agree with it or if you don't understand it yourself, right? And I think that's what, focus on that awareness, the why. Go to the executive team or figure out who the sponsor is, because it sounds like if you're not bought in, it's going to be hard for you to get your staff bought in and other people. So you got to go to the sponsor, send them an email, schedule a meeting, whatever's most appropriate, and ask these questions. Why this change? Why now? How did you come to this? What factors did you take into account? What was the process? So you want to get them to share with you their process for coming to this conclusion to implement this change. Then that's the awareness. Then you can focus on that personal decision to participate. Because you're right, until you decide to participate, it's hard to take that out and get other people to participate. So go back using that ADKAR model, go to that awareness and say, do I have answers to these questions? Why this change? Why now? What's the risk of not changing? And figure out the sponsor or the executive team that implemented it, what is the process that they went through? What did they analyze? And get all those answers for yourself so that then you can buy in and take that out to your team.
Okay, we still have a few more minutes for questions. If anybody has one, please send it into the chat box, and we'll pause here for a few more seconds.
I do encourage everybody to read the book, Strengths-Based Leadership, because part of the book, they talk about their methodology, but in the back half of the book, they talk about how each of these strengths can create trust, stability, compassion, and hope. Through, if you're, whatever your talents are, how does somebody with strategic talent create trust? Somebody with context talent, how do they create stability? And what can they do? And that's a really good book for individuals to understand how they can impact their team, their colleagues, but also to coach the sponsors and help them to understand the activities that they do naturally and how they can use that to help your change initiative, to sponsor your change initiative. It is Strengths-Based Leadership by Gallup. Strengths-Based Leadership by Gallup. One more question. One more.
Yep, still have time for another one if anybody has one. While we wait, I'm going to remind everybody that our next webinar will be next Monday, December the 11th, and it's Why Do MSA Studies by Eric Gasper, who's a trainer in application services for PQ Systems, headquartered there in the Dayton, Ohio area. So looking forward to that talk on Monday. Let's see, do we have any other questions?
Just to close out, I'll just say that sometimes I'm an introvert, so I understand that you might be processing some of this information and think about questions later, and feel free to email me if you have a question or something comes up, and that can happen, 2-3 hours from now. I should have asked her this.
Hey, Karen, Heather has a question. It just came in.
Best practices to scale up change management for organization-wide changes versus smaller changes. I would say I would start by segmenting, market segmentation, and piloting if you can in different areas so that you can build success. Sometimes it can be daunting to do everybody all at once, and it's easier if you can carve out by department, by group, by some way, by title, what the impact is going to be. So if you do that impact assessment, who's being impacted the most, and then focus on a pilot group so that you can have some success, that can be a good way instead of a big bang approach to change. But a lot of that depends on the organization and the change that's happening. If it's impacting everybody at the same time, that can be more difficult. But if there's resistance to change management, sometimes taking a small group and showing that you have success and that it's different from another group, that can be real helpful. I always do 80-20. Where are you going to get the biggest bang for your buck? And focus there, and then it spreads out. That could be a whole webinar in itself, Heather.
Let's see. I thought I just saw something. Oh, I just saw another question from Ted. How do you manage a system with regards to efficiency when management would rather give hours than compensation? How do you fight resistance to working hard?
Resistance to working hard. To me, it goes back to the why. You have to go back to the awareness. The why. Why did they decide to do this? What is the benefit? What is the risk of not doing it? Why now? Sometimes it's, we're going to do it this way for now, and then we're going to do something later. It sounds like in that situation, the sponsor of the change has not clearly communicated why the approach, why was that selected. And I think you have to go back to the awareness and go back to the sponsor in some cases and say, why are we doing it this way? Why not this way? And there may be factors that you don't know or don't understand that they weren't shared with you, and that would impact your understanding of what they're asking you to do. So I would go back to that, because again, that's the desire, the personal decision to change. What I hear in that question is that desire is not there. The personal decision to change has not been realized, and so you have to go to the step before that, which is awareness, and say, why this change? Why now? Why this process? Why? And get those questions answered, and that's going to be really helpful for you. And other people, because if you're asking these questions, I'm sure there's others, and in that flight risk model, that's what's happening, is loss of productivity because we don't understand why.
Okay.
Thank you all.
Yeah, let's see. We don't have any other questions. I'm looking at the time. We're a little bit run over, but that's quite okay. If people do have questions, Karen's contact information is showing up on the screen. And we can make that available for folks if they do want to contact Karen individually one-on-one later on after thinking more about the subject. But anyway, I'd like to thank everybody for tuning in with us today, and also like to thank Karen for presenting this excellent webinar for us as well.
I clearly have no passion for the topic, right?
Absolutely not. With all that being said, we'd like to wish everyone a good rest of the day, and thanks for tuning in, and we'll hopefully see most of you on Monday. And until then, have a good rest of the day. Bye now.